Matthew here from MiniBoardGaming.com with Craig from DC, not DC Comics. And this is another rule debate. And today we're going to cover one more Necron topic, and then we're going to move on to other topics. I promise we're not just going to talk about Necrons, although this one actually is going to be interesting as well. Here is the question for today's topic of conversation, our debate, if you will, is, do Necron death marks, when they arrive via ethereal interception in their opponent's turn, when they deep strike, are they allowed to shoot in their opponent's shooting phase?
And this has major impact in playing the Necron unit, because the death marks, they could either be a very powerful unit, or, as they are now, no one plays them, because they just don't think they're worth the points. But if you read the rules, and rules as they're written, they could be used very effectively.
I agree. This one's a tough one, though, because I just thought of another argument against it, but we'll get to that in a second. So, first off, let us read the rules. Let us turn, first off, to the Necron Codex. And we have, and there's nothing in the FAQ about this, right?
No, there's not. It's never been FAQ'd.
There's no FAQ for either 5th or 6th edition, so we don't have to look up that. So under the death mark, they have ethereal interception as a rule. Immediately after an enemy unit arrives from reserve, any death mark units in deep strike reserve, so you have to declare that first, that have not yet entered play can themselves choose to enter play via deep strike, usually in the enemy turn. I think it says usually because it's possible that if your enemy's Necrons and he deep strikes his death marks, then you could immediately then deep strike your death marks, which would be in your turn. So I think that's why that usually is there.
Okay.
Just want to get some of the wording stuff out of the way. Any death mark units that choose not to enter play in this fashion make reserve rolls as normal in subsequent turns. Okay, so basically an opponent arrives from reserve, whether deep strike, whether outflank, whether just normally walking on the board, doesn't matter. You can then immediately, it doesn't say the word immediately, but we'll just assume immediately, because when else would you do it? Can themselves choose to enter play via deep strike, usually in the enemy turn. So
it says usually in the enemy turn, and that's pretty important that it says enemy turn.
Yeah, and also that it says turn. So before we go any further, Craig is going to read at the beginning of the rule book, in page 9, it talks about the turn. So this is important that we get terminology. Although, allow me to once again put this in here, Games Workshop is not always consistent with their terminology. But in this case, I think they're pretty consistent with the word turn. So go ahead and read it.
And this is the Master Rulebook on page 9 in bold. It says, whenever a rule refers to a turn, it always means player turn, unless specifically refers to game turn. So this one says that turn, which means player's turn.
Exactly. Usually in the enemy turn, because that's usually when enemies arrive via reserves. And that's not me being tongue-in-cheek. Like sometimes you could actually have them arriving in your turn, just like death marks.
Right. So this discussion is isolated to the enemy's turn.
Yes. So let's just give an example. Some guys walk on from your enemy. Your enemy is their turn. Some guys arrive from reserve. You say, okay, death mark's going to deep strike. It doesn't specify when it happens. We're going to assume that it happens right after that one because any other timing wouldn't make much sense. They didn't specify here, though, which kind of screws that whole thing up. But who cares? And you deep strike in their turn right immediately after that unit arrives from reserves. Okay, so now you're there on the board. You've just deep striked. And I remember reading that rule thinking, well, that's dumb. Now they can just shoot at you in their shooting phase.
Right, you show up and get slaughtered.
Yeah, why would you ever want to do that? Because deep striking, you're not going to get into terrain very easily. Because in 5th edition, especially, dangerous terrain killed you with no armor saves. Now you have armor saves, so now they could survive it. They have a 3+ armor save, so you could try to deep strike into a building or something to give you like super good cover, whatever. But I don't see much purpose in this, unless
you look at the Master Rulebook on page 36 on the bottom left-hand corner of the deep strike entry. It says for units that deep strike. In that turn's shooting phase, these units can fire or run as normal, and obviously count as having moved in the previous movement phase.
And then it goes on talking about vehicles, but we don't have to worry about that. So there is the thing right there. Rules as written. Remember, there's always two arguments. Rules as written and rules as intended. Rules as intended says, well, they might have written that, but what they meant was this. And sometimes there's an argument for that. In this case, there actually is one too. But then there's rules as written where you say, okay, but if you follow it to the letter, this is exactly what happens. And but then you sometimes, like the death ray thing, you get this infinite loop, but that says, okay, this happens this way, and then the rule says, yeah, but then it's this way, and then it says, yeah, but this way, and it goes on forever. But this one's pretty straightforward. So in that turn's shooting phase. So they arrive, let's say you're playing against a Space Marine player I guess a Space Marine, that would be kind of scary. And he comes on, and you arrive in his turn.
Correct. In that player's turn.
So in that turn's shooting phase, what is that turn's shooting phase?
Correct. I think it's his shooting phase. Now, this also brings up another argument. Who gets to shoot first?
That's where I was going to come from later on. It's like, now, let's actually, this is something that came to my mind, let's look up the shooting phase and see how it works, because this might throw another monkey wrench into it. Because these are this rule that we're going to read right now is something that we barely ever look at, because it is so obvious what you're supposed to do. Shooting phase on page 12. Okay. So, during the shooting phase, so here's what happens. Okay, let's read this. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. During the shooting phase, units armed with ranged weapons can fire at the enemy. You can choose any order for your units to shoot. That's important wording. You can choose any order for your units to shoot, but you must complete all the firing by one unit before you move on to the next.
Okay.
So then there's steps. It says first, nominate unit to shoot. During the shooting phase, a unit containing models armed with ranged weapons can be nominated to make shooting attacks as long as they're not locked in close combat and as long as they're not running. And it says this is not a comprehensive list. Other game rules or special rules can sometimes affect a unit's ability to shoot. This is explained thoroughly when it occurs. Right. Thorough. I like how they use the word thoroughly. So, nominate unit to shoot. So the question is, we're in the shooting phase right now, so let's back up even further. Even further. The turn. Actually, where does it list off the phases? Okay. Yeah, see, it never specifies. Okay, here we are. During his turn, a player... Oh, yeah. During his turn, a player can usually move and fight once with each of his units. For convenience and flow of gameplay, we divide a player's turn into three main phases: movement, shooting, and assault.
Okay, that's usually gives you your out.
I know. Always gives you your out. So that's the problem, because now it uses the word you. See, this is the difference. At first it says during his turn, and we'll assume her. So
Shim's turn.
Well, it says his, so girls aren't allowed to play Warhammer. Rules is written.
I have seen it happen a couple of times.
What, girls play Warhammer?
Yes.
Yeah, well, they're completely breaking almost every rule in the book, because it talks about his.
Well, yeah, if you want to read it literally, then females should not be allowed to play.
Yep. But for the sake of argument, females are more than welcome to play.
Correct.
Even if they only represent 1 or 2% of gamers. Okay, so the problem here is, it goes from saying a player can do this, blah, 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 to this means that you move any models you want to first. Then when you are finished all your moving, you can shoot with your models. So right there we can make an argument that in my enemy shooting phase, all my guys can shoot. Because it no longer is specifying which player. It just says that I move my models, I shoot my models. That's obviously ridiculous.
Yes,
Obviously.
it is.
It's very ridiculous. But
Right.
rules as written, in this case, fails. Okay? And I'm agreeing that is stupidly ridiculous. And so don't think, oh, Matthew's trying to bend the rules. I'm just trying to say that this is how unclear things are. Finally, once your shooting is all completed, you can charge into assault and resolve any close combats. This process helps to keep track of what is going on and makes it easier to know when one player's actions are over and your opponent can start his turn and take his revenge. So now it kind of specified that you is the person whose turn it is. And so it never says that your opponent is allowed to choose any models that or units that could shoot in your turn and shoot them. It's no part of the shooting phase that is there. So I don't think that's an argument against it, though. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all.
Why not? Rules is written doesn't say anything about you shooting your models in their turn.
Well, in 5th edition, there was the argument that you never do any shooting in the opponent's phase. But now with Snapfire and when someone Overwatch, you do shoot in the enemy phase. So I think that's more argument that allows
Or Interceptor.
Right.
There's Interceptor too.
Correct. And it was the only thing that could ever be done before. I believe the Grey Knights could shoot a psychic power in the enemy's turn. But now there's plenty of things that happen in the enemy's turn. And I believe if you look at the death marks and you read the intent of them, I mean, they're hunters from hyperspace, and it says ethereal interception. It's not ethereal show up and wait. You're intercepting the enemy unit. So when they show up, you show up, and I believe if you read the rules, you're allowed to shoot or run.
So then the question is, let's say that is correct. Let's say we made that house rule. Who would shoot first?
You know, we've had this argument before at where I play in DC, and it boils down to, well, shooting doesn't have an initiative, so basically you're the same. So in a combat, I know this is kind of really stretching the rules here, but in hand-to-hand combat, if you had the same initiative, you strike the blows at the same time. So we say all the shooting, theoretically, if you think of the game, happens at the same time. So the shooting happens at the same time. So my death mark shoot, and whatever wounds you take, those guys are still allowed to shoot back.
Okay. But that's definitely house rules being added in there, because if there was an order of operations, then anything that death marks killed wouldn't be able to fire.
Right.
So that's more a house rule that's been implicated to make it make sense. So what it comes down to is there isn't clear rules on how to handle this. It seems, because of the wording, that they should be able to shoot in their enemy's turn. But given the fact that that could actually be used as an argument against it, if we're really going to debate this, right?
Also.
Because it doesn't specify in which order it happens, then you could argue rules as intended is that they did not intend it. Because if they did intend it, then they would tell you when they would want them to shoot.
But I could counter that argument with rules as intended. Why would it even be here? Because you can just deep strike in your turn. So why would they...
Well, you don't necessarily arrive from reserve, so you have to roll 3+ to arrive.
Right. Well, yeah, that's the one advantage to doing this. But why would they put a whole paragraph entry and make these basically killer snipers from space if it didn't intend for them to show up in the enemy's turn and actually do something?
And I agree. But taking the kind of the devil's advocate kind of stand here, and because it is a debate, we do need to look at both sides. In this case, it is not clear, because then the argument is, well, who shoots first?
Right.
And because that is not specified, the argument could be that their intention was not that they could shoot. Otherwise, it seems an obvious oversight, because it should have showed up in their very first playtest. When they deep strike into their enemy turn, they're like, oh, wait, who goes first? Unless they actually shot when they arrived, but no, it says it in their subsequent shooting phase. They can. So yeah, this is where we get kind of confusing. So it makes me think that their intention was that they couldn't shoot, but at the same time, I completely agree with the other intent, which is why would they arrive then?
I know. What's the point in the rule?
Yeah, especially when now reserves come in 3+. The Necron monolith can bring in guys from reserves. There's more than one way to get these guys on the board for sure. So why would they have that?
Correct.
So that's our opinion. I'm not sure what we're going to make the house rule.
Oh, come on. You've never used them. I've never seen you use them in a battle report.
I used them at first.
Oh, did you?
I did, but I never did the ethereal interception because I thought it was stupid. I'm like, why would I do that when I can just start them on the board and start sniping guys?
That's my argument that the rule is that they can shoot, because why would you do that?
Exactly. What do you think?
I tell you what, you can fight me, and I'll let you bring them in and shoot me.
Okay, then I'll go for that. But are you going to play Necrons too?
No, I'm playing Tau.
Okay, then that's good then. So for our game, the house rule, I'm just joking. I think, I don't know. I think right now I'd say yes. Okay, they can shoot in the shooting phase. And I would say they would shoot before everybody else. And anybody they kill can't shoot. I know that's bold. But if it's there, if it's interception, all your arguments point to them shooting first.
Okay, well,
because you're like interception. You're saying, if they're going to intercept, that means that they're doing this interception thing. And intercept means first. The interceptor rule, which is completely unrelated, by the way, says that after everybody's arrived in the movement, it gets to fire. So it fires essentially at the beginning of the shooting phase. It's actually at the end of the movement phase, but still at the beginning of the shooting phase before the opponent gets to shoot anything. So if we go along that kind of intention with ethereal interception,
right. I agree.
Then maybe they should shoot before everybody else.
Oh, well, we'll play test it, and if it's incredibly OP, then maybe you can make your decision then.
Well, that's hard to tell, because a good roll will make it look OP, or overpowered for everybody else that doesn't use acronyms all the time. Or a really bad roll will make it like, oh, who cares?
Right,
they're going to be easy to kill anyways. What do you think? This is a good one, because I'm still not quite sure. So leave your comments below. Keep it civil. Thumbs up the comments that you think are good. Thumbs down the comments that are just trolling. And stay tuned for even more rule debates. This is Matthew from Mini Wargaming with Craig from DC, but not DC Comics. Happy Wargaming.